I'm Kwame Anthony Appiah. I teach philosophy at NYU in the college and the law school, and I'm this year's recipient of the Kluge Prize. Human lives are made as men and women and non-binary people, and as blacks and whites and Asians, and as gay and straight and bisexual and people and so on, as Ghanaians, as Americans, as Catholics, as Protestants. And these identities are really central to making a life, and therefore to making a decent life, making a life that's a successful life. And just sort of thinking about that. I'm not saying nobody had ever said anything relevant to this before. Aristotle said things that are relevant to this. John Stuart Mill said things that are relevant to this. But putting it together as a package required the availability of the concept of identity. And that's what I tried to do. So philosophy it's got names on it, but it's basically a collective activity. And it's part of a wider collective activity, which is the human conversation about what matters in the world, about how we should live together, about what we owe to one another, about how the world works. And that has to be a conversation, and a conversation in the following sense. I'm not preaching, I'm not telling other people what to think. I'm bringing to a conversation things that I think are helpful so that people can decide what to think for themselves. And that's what they're bringing to me, right? I mean, in good conversations, they're not telling me this is what you should think. They're saying, here's a point of view, here's an angle, here's a fact that's relevant. Don't you think in the light of that fact you should adjust your view? And I'm deciding whether to adjust my view. So I think of philosophy very much as not just thinking together with philosophers, but our role in the culture is to think together with other people, but not to tell them what to think. In order to think, it's thinking with people.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Shari Werb, the director of the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement, and I oversee programming here at the library. We're delighted you could join us for Live at the Library tonight, our Thursday night happy hour experience that since launching in 2022 has welcomed over 140,000 guests. We hope you had a chance to enjoy a drink, explore the Great Hall, and check out one of our current exhibitions. If not now, come back and do that. A special welcome as well to all of you joining online. We are live streaming this event. We're so glad you're here tonight. Whether you're a longtime follower of the Ethicist column, like I am, or just someone who enjoys a good moral quandary, we're in for an evening that promises to be both fun and thought-provoking, with moments of laughter, some serious reflection, and maybe even a little healthy debate. We're honored to be joined by our very special guest, Kwame Anthony Appiah, a pioneering scholar and one of today's most thoughtful and engaging philosophers. We're excited to have him for his very first public event at the library, and we would like to thank the Kluge Center for their support for this program. I think we can. Dr. Appiah is a 2024 recipient of the John W. Kluge Prize for Achievement in the Study of Humanity, as you just saw. This prestigious award is one of the library's highest honors, celebrating work that bridges scholarship and public life. And few people do that more gracefully than tonight's guest. As a professor, author, and longtime New York Times columnist behind the Ethicist, Dr. Appiah has helped millions of readers think through everyday moral dilemmas, from family conflicts to big philosophical questions, always with clarity, empathy, and a touch of humor. This evening, you'll have a chance to hear his take on real-world ethical dilemmas, and even vote on what you would do, before he shares how he approaches each case. To help guide us through it all, I'm delighted to welcome our host for the evening, Roswell Encina, the library's Chief Communications Officer. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Kwame Anthony Appiah and Roswell Encina.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Library of Congress. We have some housekeeping notes. Usually, we tell people to put their phones away. Tonight, we need you to use your phones. Just make sure you silence them. So a couple things you need to do before we start this conversation. Check your cell signal, and if it's not good, you could use the library's Wi-Fi, which is LOC Guest. Right afterwards, click that QR code, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. First, we want to thank Dr. Appiah for being here tonight. He is the most recent Kluge Prize winner. It's almost been a year. Yes. How's that been? Has that sunk in yet?
I've been able to make a large contribution to the IRS. So that's one thing that's happened. No, it's been fun actually because I get to try and defend the library's decision to people. I get to try and explain to them what I do and why someone might want to be given a prize for that. So yeah, it's been great. I was very, the event here at the library when I was presented with the medal, I was asked to say a few words. I enjoyed that very much too, and it was an opportunity to say a little bit about some of what I think you may have heard on the tape about how I think about the role of philosophers in our society in terms of, giving people tools for thinking about their lives. Very definitely not about telling people what to do. That's not my view of what philosophers are for. But people have to figure, everybody's in charge of their own life. Everybody has to figure out how to live their lives. And it's a hard job, and it's good to have some help. And exactly. I hope that one of the things that philosophers do is provide help with that.
So you've been writing for the Ethicist column for almost a decade now. What drew you in to do this?
Well, honestly, when I was first asked to do it, I wasn't sure that it was a good idea because the column, as you perhaps know, is very much about everyday problems. And moral philosophers don't typically spend a lot of time with everyday problems. A lot of what we do is very general stuff about the structure of moral thinking. And a lot of moral philosophers never actually say very much about what anyone should do about anything. So I got into it sideways because for a while the magazine ran a podcast, and I was one of the 3 people in the conversation. And that was a very enjoyable podcast and conversation, but it didn't produce a column. It just produced, somebody had to take things out of the, and so the editor decided that, he called me up and said, look, this isn't working, so would you mind just drafting a few columns? I'll give you some old questions, and if I like what you do, I'll ask you to take it over and write it. And at that point I thought, is it going to be, what do I have to bring to bear? And it turned out that just focusing on the problems people had and bringing to bear the things in my head that I have in my head because I read a lot of moral philosophy, it turned out that often there was something useful to say.
Well, we were chatting before this started tonight that many of these dilemmas are very relatable. I mean, it really kind of balances out where you fall on a big moral spectrum here. I know you work a lot with your editors. How are these problems or dilemmas selected?
So the email, ethicist at NewYorkTimes.com, is run by my editor. And she sends me questions that come in that she would like me to answer. But mostly, I think she sends me all the emails that actually have a question in them. Because if you have an email address published from the New York Times, a lot of people write to you who don't have a question. They have something they want you to know. Or they don't have a question about ethics. It's a question about, how to persuade their doctor to do something or something, where I don't know how to persuade doctors to do things. I have trouble enough with my own doctor. So she picks the ones that actually have something for me to do, and usually every other weekend, I get up at a modest time on a Saturday, maybe 9 a.m., and I have a cup of coffee and I don't get dressed. I go down and I sit in front of my computer and I answer as many as I can in the next 5 or 6 hours, so that by the time I'm getting ready to make dinner for my husband, I've gotten enough for several weeks.
When you hear these situations or these dilemmas, how do you start unpacking the issues that are being faced by these folks?
Good. So very often I look at it and my first response is, I have no idea what you should do. So then I think, okay, I'm going to describe the situation in sort of my terms. I'm going to describe what I think I've learned from the letter about the person's situation. And then there are 4 or 5, I'll stick to 4. There are 4 sort of heuristics that I use, which come from 4 classical philosophers. There's a Confucius heuristic, which is, what are the relationships here? Is this your colleague, your brother, your friend? Is it a stranger? And as you know, the Confucian tradition is rich in thinking about how our relationships affect our duties. Then there's a question, an Aristotelian question. What questions of character does this raise? What kind of person do you want to be? And if you did this or that, wouldn't that show that you were a bad person or a good person, a person of good character, a person of bad character? Then there's Kant's question, which is what rights and duties are relevant here, are in place. And then finally, there's the question that I think of as coming from J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, or perhaps he and his father and godfather, Jeremy Bentham, who was his godfather, which is the question, what are the consequences for human welfare of what you're proposing to do? And usually, there are other things, heuristics, but those 4 heuristics give you some questions to ask when you're trying to think about someone in a human situation faced with a set of choices.
No, I've been interchanging between moral and ethical dilemma while we've been chatting all afternoon. Is there a difference? And if there is, of course, what is it?
So I don't think that a lexicographer should make much distinction. I think people use the words moral and ethical somewhat interchangeably, and dictionary should reflect usage, not some bossy philosopher telling you how to use something. But I myself favor a way of dividing them up, which is due to, I learned it from my late colleague Ronnie Dworkin, which is ethics is the subject that Aristotle wrote about. He wrote the Nicomachean Ethics. It's about how to live a good life, how to live well. Morality is about how you treat other people. Now, obviously, if you're leading a good life, you're going to be treating other people properly, so morality is part of ethics. But it isn't all of ethics, because some of ethics is about achieving projects that you have set for yourself. And that's not, that doesn't need to involve anybody else. If I want to become a concert pianist, of course I have to have an audience. But if I just want to be good at the piano, which I might commit myself to, then it matters to the success of my life that I get better at the piano, and I don't need anybody else for that. I can tell whether I'm playing the piano badly or well, in my case, badly. So, fortunately, that isn't one of my projects, becoming a great pianist. But I know I've written some novels, and I think it sort of matters to my life that I think of myself as a little bit, in part, a novelist. And therefore, I should write some novels. And again, of course, novels are meant to be read, but you could be, the satisfaction of writing a good novel is not about other people reading it. It's just recognizing that you've achieved something.
Exactly. So now we know how Dr. Appiah thinks, and how he wraps his head around these dilemmas. We need your help now. So whip out those phones, as I mentioned earlier. So you're going to help shape tonight's conversation. So we pulled 5 real moral dilemmas that have actually appeared in the Ethicist column, and you get to vote which of the 3 we're going to discuss tonight. So scan that QR code. Once you scan the QR code, it's going to ask for a code, and it's 61738289. If you're having a hard time scanning the QR code, you could go to menti.com. You see it on your screen, menti.com. For folks watching online on YouTube, there's directions on the YouTube text of how to log on. But again, for you as well online, just go to menti.com and enter 61738289. So we'll give you a couple seconds to do this. I'm hoping it's working. It's working, right? Yes, good. Again, if you have a spotty connection here at the library, if your cell phone's not working properly, you could use our Wi-Fi, which is LOC guests. So I'm hoping that's connecting. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So you're going to see the titles of the 5 dilemmas on your screen. You'll see it on your phones. And you get to rank them 1 to 5. So it's up to you to pick what do you want us to talk about. Clearly put number 1 if that's what you think is what you want, and to your least favorite to be number 5. You could also pick all 5 and put them up in the order you prefer. So here are your 5 choices. My boyfriend said he saved our cat, but not a stranger if both were drowning. Is that wrong? My mother-in-law hasn't saved for retirement. Are we on the hook? Gabriel Garcia Marquez wanted his manuscript destroyed. Is it wrong to read it? We're at a library, so can you imagine we have our own feelings about that one. My stepdad has Alzheimer's. Can my mom date someone else? And the last one is it okay that my sister secretly records our dad for laughs? So start voting. As you can see, it's in real time how people are voting. We're going to give this a minute for everyone to decide what they're seeing. While you're doing that, I do want to thank our host tonight, the Library of Congress John Kluge Center, and the marvelous staff at the Kluge Center, led by Kevin Butterfield. I know he's here. We also want to thank our quiz master, Julie Chamberlain, who's up there, who's going to be guiding us through this entire thing. All right, has everybody voted? All right. Julie, show us the results, and we'll make these the final ones. All right. The top one is, my stepdad has Alzheimer's. Can my mom date someone else? Your second choice is, my mother-in-law hasn't saved for retirement. Are we on the hook? And the third one is, and I'm curious to see what you have to say about this one. My boyfriend said he'd save our cat, but not a stranger if both were drowning. Is that wrong? It's a matter of, I guess, who the person is. So, yes. So let's get to it. So the first one is my stepdad. Let me get that to my notes. My stepdad has Alzheimer's. Can my mom date someone else? So I'm going to read the actual letter that was sent to Dr. Appiah, and we'll have you vote on how you think you'll respond to it. Then we'll hear his say. Here it is. What are your thoughts on the spouse of an early onset Alzheimer's patient dating while said patient is still alive? By way of background, my mother was the full-time caregiver of my stepfather until a few months ago. When he was moved to an assisted living and she is lonely and missing companionship, the man my mother has chosen to date is in his mid-70s, 7 years older than my mother, has lost all his money, has 3 failed marriages, and has generally have a poor reputation. The way the news was broken to us children, 2 stepchildren, including the person writing, and 2 biological children, could have been better. And we are worried our mother is acting out of fear of being alone. My siblings are hurt, angry, and dealing with their father slowly dying, and it's so hard to watch. My mother seems hell-bent on dating this man and is not receptive to hearing our concerns. It was never going to be easy to hear or to see her with someone else this soon, but seeing her with this man is alarming. It's also unlike her to be so callous towards the feelings of her children. My fear is if we draw a line in the sand, she will pick him. But anything short of that seems as if it would be ineffective. So, what do you think she should do? First, your choice is no. This would be a betrayal. Yes, her dating choices are not your concern. And the third one is, yes, it's morally acceptable to date, but yikes, this guy calls for an intervention. So, cast your vote, and we'll show you the results after you all vote. Then we're going to hear what your feelings about it are. All right. More than 200 have casted their responses. We're almost there. All right. We're down to our last few. Julie, show us the results. Oh, yes. You've all said, yes, it's morally acceptable to date, but yikes, this guy calls for an intervention. Dr. Appiah, did they make the right selection?
I think that if your spouse is no longer capable of relationship with you, if they're no longer there in a certain sense, then while you don't lose the while the spousal obligation to take care of them remains as long as they're alive, I don't think you have the duties, the spousal duties of maintaining the relationship. And so I would say, I think I sort of agree with the general, with the majority here that it is morally okay.
But are there two issues here, aside from dating someone who's clearly not well?
Yes.
And the second one is this man she wants to date.
Yes, right. So what I said about the second question was that it was important to distinguish the issues. Yeah. She doesn't, in a way, she's raising the question about her mother's behavior less because she's worried about her stepfather and more because she's worried about her mother. And so in a way, this often happens. People put me a question in which, so she asked me, is it okay? But really what she's worried about is my mother okay? Mm-hmm. And so I said something about that. I said, you know, you obviously, you have reason to worry about this man with your mother. He doesn't have a very good track record. And, but on the other hand, just as children are not very grateful usually when their parents tell them that they've got the wrong partners, so parents are often not very grateful when their children tell them that they've got the wrong partners.
When is it acceptable to intervene on a situation like this with your parents?
I mean, I think...
Or a loved one?
So this is one of those places where I think what's okay is a little bit dependent upon what's customary in the society that you live in. So in some societies, for example, one's just not supposed to say anything about the lives of one's parents. And in those societies, doing so is therefore a much more substantial intervention than it would be in a society where people are used to back and forth between the generations about these things. But in our society, sort of for most native-born Americans, I think, it seems to me it's fine to tell your parents, because you love them, that you think they're making a mistake. But just as when you're doing that with children, it's really important to do so in a sort of loving and respectful way. And that means that if you sort of try and they don't take it, if you want to maintain a relationship with them, you're just going to have to accept that it is still their life.
And on the other note, how far is your marital commitment to your partner or to your spouse?
Yes. Well, I mean, there, the traditional Christian marriage service involves a commitment till death do us part. And on the other hand, and for a long time in the West, divorce was very, very difficult, if not impossible. That's why Henry VIII left Rome, because they wouldn't let him get rid of his wives. So this had an impact on the Reformation. In England, John Stuart Mill actually campaigned about this. In England, it was very difficult to get divorced until the late 19th century. So now I think that was a mistake, and Mill explained why it was a mistake. It was a mistake because it's not reasonable to expect someone to make a commitment of that sort without having what they can't have, which is a full sense of what the content of the commitment is. People change, life changes, the world changes. And while it's really important, I think, not to make this commitment unless you're intending to keep it, you can't guarantee that it's going to make sense. And so divorce is sometimes the best thing for both parties. And I don't think it's morally wrong to agree to come to end a marriage. But while it's there, there's a thing that can happen, which happened in this case, which is that the other party, this is one of the ways that Mill was right, something can happen that makes the promise, in some sense, undermines one of the presuppositions of the promise. If someone's no longer psychologically available to you, that mutual psychological availability is at the heart of marriage. And if it disappears, even though the person's still around, then I think you can discharge yourself without their consent, because they're no longer in a position to give or withhold consent.
In many cases, you don't know the whole backstory of many of these people writing letters. And you touched on it a little bit. How they grew up culturally or religiously, does that have an impact on the ethical or moral answers?
Yes, I mean, I think it does. But in the following sort of way, it's easiest to think about this in terms of family obligations. So I grew up in two places. My mother was English, my father was Ghanaian. I grew up between England and Ghana. I spent about half my life in each place by the time I went to college. Where I grew up in Ghana, for a child, the main adult male in your life is your mother's brother, not your mother's husband. Your mother's husband, obviously, is your genitor. He's your biological parent, and he's interested in you, and he loves you, perhaps. But it's your maternal uncle whose job it is to make sure you have school fees, pocket money, and in the early 20th century, about half of the families in my hometown, women lived with their brothers and visited their husbands. Now, against that social background, it seems obvious to me that the sort of obligations we impose legally on fathers in this kind of society are reasonably imposed on the uncle. I mean, that's how the society is organized. In other words, who should carry out the obligation depends a bit on how the society is configured. Every society has to have a way of deciding which adults will be responsible for children. And a society that doesn't have that is defective. But fortunately, there aren't any such societies. But there are different ways of doing it. So I think you should sort of live up to the standards that are made appropriate by the social background. Now, the example I gave makes the point that in the modern world, where people move between societies, I like to say that according to my parents' families, my mother thought I belonged to my father's family, my father thought I belonged to my mother's family, so I was without a family. And so when you have situations where people are pulling on different cultural traditions, problems can arise, and it can be unobvious what the right thing to do is. Societies, families and communities tend to solve these problems. So I got two families instead of zero families, in fact. Both my mother's family and my father's family looked after us and were very nice to us. And I'm very close to my maternal and my paternal cousins. But I think that's an example of the way in which I think the cultural... And so we are a society in which people have come from many different places, and so the obligations, the family obligations that people should recognize, I think, vary very much within our society because people have brought different traditions with them. I'll give you another example here. I mean, in terms of responsibility for parents. So in the Confucian societies of East Asia, it's widely assumed by everybody that you have responsibility to look after your parents in old age. And Confucius said so. and
Confucius says so.
Yes, and they've taught it all along. So in Singapore, where the majority of the population, the largest population part of the population is Chinese, they don't have as much in the way of social protections for adults because children have legal responsibilities for looking after indigent parents. They don't, if they can afford it, they have the parents or the representatives of the parents can go to court and say, I have living children and they're not looking after me, and the court will tell them what to do. And that's That seems reasonable in that society. That's why it's a democratic society. If it didn't seem reasonable, they would change it. But here, I think we would think that was, I don't think you could get that past here.
That's a perfect segue, actually, to our next one that you all selected, which is my mother-in-law hasn't saved for retirement. Are we on the hook? So during, when we show these graphics, you see these beautiful illustrations. These actually came from the Ethicist. This is by an illustrator named Tomi and so we want to thank him for letting us use these illustrations tonight. So again, here's the next one, and get your phones ready. This story's a little bit longer than the last one. So my mother-in-law hasn't saved for retirement. Are we on the hook? My mother-in-law is in her 50s and has worked as a horse trainer her whole life. She doesn't own property and instead rents a house at the barn where she trains. She has no assets or retirement plan and is getting to the point where doing the job is becoming more difficult for her physically. My husband has tried to talk to her about her fiscal future, and she shuts these conversations down. She likes to talk about someday winning the lottery and buying her own place. My parents, meanwhile, have invested in their retirement and are financially secure. Generationally, my family has made it a priority and has been a privilege to consider that parents shouldn't be a financial burden on their children. They believe that aging parents should rely on their children only for emotional care, like helping to facilitate spending time with their grandchildren. I can't help comparing my mother-in-law's attitude with my family's and consider her choices selfish. My husband and I are the only financial stable family members on his side, and every time my mother-in-law makes a comment about plans that will require a miracle windfall, I get anxious and frustrated thinking about how that financial burden will likely fall on us when she inevitably can't work any longer. To be clear, she says, she has never hinted that she expects us to care for her, but we don't see what other options she has, so it feels as if she has her head in the sand. Do we have a right to know what her plans are or make sure she has a plan? If she won't discuss them with us, don't that absolve us of the future responsibility? What do you think? Here are your choices. Yes, there is a moral obligation to help as much as you can. The second choice, somewhat. You at least have a responsibility to help in a limited way. And third, no. You have your own financial and emotional responsibilities. Cast your votes. This is a little bit, maybe a tad harder.
Yes.
Oh, well, they're voting fast. All right. All right. We only have less. We have 4 people. All right, Julie, show us the results. There you go. So we're somewhat, you at least have a responsibility to help in a limited way. How do you feel, Dr. Appiah?
Well, I'd like to be the dad of the 14% in blue, but but I can't say that I think that's. I don't think there is an unlimited obligation of this sort in our kind of society. There are other mechanisms in place. They're not as good as they would be in Norway or Sweden or Denmark, but there are reasonable public mechanisms and also philanthropic mechanisms for helping people who need help. But because they're not super, I think it's reasonable to take the sort of 70% view, the middle view, and say that if she does end up needing some help, you should at least be willing to offer it. She hasn't asked for it, and maybe she wouldn't, but if she does ask for it, I think you should offer some help. But the most important thing to say, I think, to someone in this situation is you've got to talk to each other. I mean, she's in her 50s, so this isn't an immediate problem, and it's soluble at least to some degree, if you do something about it now, as any financial planner would tell you. So what I suggested was that they should offer to help her get a financial planner, so that you're not taking over the decision for her. You're not treating her as someone incompetent, but you're saying, look, this is something where there are actually experts, people who can advise you on how to make the preparations.
If the mother, just in the story, keeps on, kicking the can down the street here, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's okay to be, this is a mother, I think it's okay to be frank with your mother. This is someone who understands that your reason for being interested in them is that you love them, and that it's not that you feel obliged as if there's an angel on your shoulder commanding you to do something. You love them and you think they're going to be in trouble and you want to help them. But you have to do it respectfully, because otherwise the conversation isn't going to work. And as I said, I think it's manageable if now to begin to make some plans. At least it'll make it a little bit better. And that means and offering help, offering the help of a professional, so that it isn't your children sitting around complaining that you're not doing this and not doing that and telling you to do this and that. It's you seeking advice that someone's kindly paid for. That seems to be like a better solution than just, as it were, giving up because she won't have the conversations. You say, all right, Mum, you don't want to talk about this with us. I understand that, but we love you and we think you are going to have to think about how you're going to be looking after yourself in old age, and we'd like to provide you with someone who's an expert in thinking about that and planning, financial planning.
And an option, like in dilemmas like this, it's hard to distinguish what's right and wrong, or what's the right thing to do, or the appropriate thing to do. How do you deal with that when it's not clear-cut? Well,
I think so. There's two things. One is, even if I knew more, it might still not be clear-cut. But probably if I knew more, I don't know anything about what income level these people are at. I don't know, she doesn't tell me how demanding it would be on them to spend resources on her mother-in-law. Maybe, if they were beyond a certain amount rich, it might not be all that demanding. I don't know what her mother is like. I don't know how easy it is to talk to her mother. She says her mother doesn't want to talk about it, but, that might mean many different things.
If the son or daughter are like Jeff Bezos, I'm hoping that they
Yes, exactly, yes. No, obviously there are people but those people wouldn't think of this as a problem, right? So I think knowing more sometimes makes it clear, but often I think it's just true that there are many relevant considerations. You can lay them out, and some of them tend in favor of one result and some of another, but weighing them all in such a way as to decide on a particular result is not something that's something the person has to do for themselves, because in the end they have the largest amount of information about what all. You can help them think about what the options are and think about options that they haven't considered, like offering a financial planner, which they hadn't thought of. But in the end, the central thought of a lot of so-called, what philosophers call liberal philosophical tradition, is that each of us is in charge of our own life. People who love us can help us manage our lives. The government can create a social background which makes it easier for us to manage our own lives. But in the end, each person is charged with the ultimate responsibility for their own life. And if you want to read a very beautiful expression of this idea, it's chapter 3 of John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, which is called On Individuality as One of the Elements of Well-Being, is about that idea that each of us is in charge of our own lives, which doesn't mean other people don't care about us, doesn't mean they can't help us. But it does mean that as long as a person has the competence, as long as they have the cognitive abilities, it's their life to live, and they can't expect you to solve their problems for them, and you haven't the right to impose your solutions on them.
Now, we're giggling a little bit here with some of these dilemmas that these folks are having, but these are real people.
Yes.
When you wake up and you grab your coffee and you start answering them, do you struggle how to answer some of these problems?
Well, look, yes, but I'm writing a column, and my main task is to make it interesting for my readers, because there's 1 million readers and 1 letter writer. So just on the consequences for human welfare, 1 million point of view, I should give more weight to that. But I'm assuming it cannot in general be the case that the people who write to me, that I'm the only source of advice that they have. I mean, they're really in much worse trouble than they appear if they think that I'm the only way they can get help with something. So I'm not too worried that, if I got a letter which suggested that somebody was mentally ill, I wouldn't answer it, because I'm not, the way to help people who are mentally ill is therapy. It's not sending a letter into the blue. And I don't get those letters. The Times wouldn't even suggest that I answer letters from people who are obviously mentally ill. So I'm assuming that these people have other choices. I mean, in fact, very often what I think is going on is they've had a discussion about what to do with their friends or their spouses or their families, and they're divided. And so what they want is to be able to slap down the Sunday Times and say, "He agrees with me." And I try not, when I think that's what's happening, I try not to give them that, because that probably means they've shaped the question in a way that's going to get the answer that they want. And that's another thing. It's part of the convention that I do not get to ask them any questions.
I asked you earlier, because you've received nearly 500 of these, or you've answered
Yes.
nearly 500 of these in almost 10 years you've been doing this. Have you ever heard back of what they did?
The best back thing I got wasn't from the person who wrote the letter. The letter was from a beautifully written letter from a woman whose husband was unfaithful to her, and she wasn't living in the United States, and she was worried that where she was living, she would lose custody of her children if she left him, and she didn't want to do that. And so I gave her some advice, and I got another beautifully written letter from the other woman, just saying how it looked from her point of view. And I thought, this guy has incredibly good taste in women. Though they don't have such good taste in men.
Speaking of these boyfriends, let's go to our next one. And I'm looking forward to this next one. This one is, my boyfriend said he'd save our cat, but not a stranger, if both were drowning. Is that wrong? Again, thank you to Tomi for these wonderful illustrations. Here's the story. My boyfriend and I were talking about protecting human life, and he said that he doesn't believe that human life is necessarily worth more than any other kind of life. For example, he said that if one of our cats were drowning next to a human who was a stranger to us, who was also drowning, and he could just save one, he would choose our cat. Is this morally wrong? How many of you are cat owners or cat lovers? So this is for you. So here are your choices. 1, no, save the cat. This is morally defensible instinct. 2, it depends on the specific context. There's no universal right answer. And 3, yes, it's morally wrong. Human life is more valuable. And if you saw the Superman movie this weekend, you know he saves both squirrels and humans. So.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
There's a whole scene where he saves a squirrel. And a dog, so. All right.
technology is working.
They're going, it's in real time. Yes. All right. Right. Let me ask this question again. Before I ask Julie to show us the results, raise your hands again if you're a cat owner or cat lover. All right. Julie, show the answers if we're going to save Snuffles here. So. Oh. The dog lovers won. So, yes, it's morally wrong. Human life is more valuable. I think there's a lot, and we're laughing about this.
Yes.
But there's a lot
here.
It depends who the stranger is. It depends, if the question is, would he pick, if the choice was the cat or her, would he pick the cat? So I'll let you unpack this first.
I mean, so this one thing here is to insist that that what her boyfriend says, that she shouldn't put too much weight in her judgment of her boyfriend on his answer to this question. What he would actually do faced with an actual human being and an actual cat, I think, can't be predicted by what you say in a conversation about this sort of thing. And I suspect that most people faced with an actual person would save the person. And that's right. I mean, I think, now the question is why it's right. And I think the answer is that, the death of a person matters in ways that the death of most animals at least doesn't. Namely, that a person has a life, not in the sense of just being alive, which is a little bit what the questioner is using it as if it's just a question of between life and death. They have a life, they're making a life, they have projects, relationships, there are things they're doing, things they might complete if they went on. And it's one of the bad things about dying is that you don't get to keep that going. Another bad thing about dying, of course, is that people miss you. But that applies to cats. But probably to a lesser extent. I mean,
they have 8 lives. They'll be fine.
I mean, typically more people care about a person than care about any cat. The people who care about the cat tend to be more limited in number, and also they care less. I mean, most of us. I think we'd think it very strange if someone was more worried about the death of their cat than they were about the death of their sibling, say, a human being with whom they had a relationship. We accept every day the deaths of thousands and thousands of strangers, and we're not moved by it, or we're not made sad by it. So the problem isn't that we don't care about the deaths of strangers. It would be very, very burdensome and unhelpful to be overwhelmed by the tragedy of the fact that there are people dying all the time. But on the other hand, it would be morally deplorable not to be moved by the death of a friend or a loved one. Adam Smith actually has a nice discussion of the fact that he says, I'm more worried about the loss of my little finger tomorrow than I am about the death of 30,000 people in an earthquake in China. And he says, that doesn't mean that I think the loss of my little finger is more important than the death of 30,000. Obviously, he says, it's more important than 30,000 people. But so our feelings, our appropriate feelings, don't reflect moral importance, they reflect something else. But so I think it's fine to be very moved by the death of your cat. And cats, I mean, for many Americans, many modern people everywhere, and many people in older forms of society, pets are a kind of fictive kin, right? They're like members of the family, and people have...
That goes with dogs, too.
Yes, sorry, this is not a... I'm not picking between cats and dogs. I have sheep, of whom I'm very fond. But at least some of them. I'm particularly fond of some of them. But so that's fine, and it's an interesting question, how much of that is a projection, because it's not clear that the animals are reciprocating. It's not that they don't care about us in some sense, but they don't care about us in the way we care about them, let me put it that way. So all of that's true, but in the end, because human beings have a life that's up and running, because they're in the midst of things, because they have more embeddedness in relation to other people, and so their deaths matter to more people, and so on. There are just lots of reasons why I think the death of a person matters more than the death of an animal, which doesn't mean that the death of an animal doesn't matter. I mean, objectively, it's not just that it matters to the person whose animal it is. You shouldn't kill animals for no good reason, because even animals are living a life, even though it's not as expansive a thing as a human life. And you know, part of what's interesting about a human life and ending it is that human life has a story, right? There's a life story that goes with a human being, and one of the reasons why it matters when you die is because many of us, all of us know we are going to die, and many of us, I think about my mother in particular, who was ready to die when she died. And she'd finished many of the projects she was up to. She had seen her grandchildren get to a decent age. She had seen that they were doing fine. And she was ready to go, and she said so. And that death is very different from the death of someone who's still in the midst of things and is cut off by a drunken driver or something. That's a very different kind of loss. So I think it's a hard question to explain why death matters in a way, because your death, unless you believe in an afterlife, your death in a way is, Wittgenstein said, death is not an event in life. And what he meant was, you don't experience your own death, and you don't experience the consequences of your own death.
Do you think these dilemmas, or these moral situations, do the answers shift in time? Something that, what we're thinking about now, does it apply in the 1950s or in the 60s or, the turn of the century? Or is it the same issues just with different faces?
Well, I mean, in order to decide what to do in any situation, it depends on what the facts are. And since facts change over time, yes, the answer changes. But I'm not sure that the relevant moral considerations change over time, but people's attitudes to them certainly do. I mean, just in relation to animals, for example, before sometime in the 19th century, hardly anybody cared about cruelty to animals. John Stuart Mill's godfather, whom I mentioned, Jeremy Bentham, was really one of the first people to say, look, animals can suffer, and this is bad. It matters that they suffer. We should not cause animal suffering. If you look at the way people in traditional societies treat animals, I mean, especially animals other than domestic animals, they're sort of indifferent to the suffering of those animals. They watch them die, they don't worry, they don't help them die, and so on. I mean, in many places. There are places where they do. So there's something where over the last, I'd say, couple of centuries, in the North Atlantic and then increasingly in other places, people have come to feel that, to recognize, I would say, the moral importance of animal suffering. It always mattered, but it wasn't always recognized that it mattered.
Did you, through almost 10 years of doing this, have you ever changed your mind? Do you look back at a previous article or a previous column that you wrote and said, I think I got that wrong, or should I recommended something else?
I mean, I haven't sort of done a 180, I don't think, on anything. Because a lot of what I do is just not tell people what to do, as I say, but try to map the relevant considerations. Sometimes I think later, I left out a relevant consideration that it would have been better to put in. And sometimes when I answer a question, I'm deliberately not covering all the things that I think are relevant, because there's one big thing that I want to say something about, and everybody can see that there are other issues, but I want to talk about one of them. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident that if you gave me the questions again and I'd forgotten my earlier answer, I would say something different in many cases. But I would be using the same set of questions, I think. I would be asking, what are the consequences of human welfare? What are the background relationships? What are the rights and duties? And what are the culturally sanctioned expectations that people are entitled to rely on? One kind of question that people often raise is, I've got this person in my life, and I'm beginning to do things for them. But I realize that it's not how they put it, but this is how I see what the situation is. But I'm realizing that I'm raising their expectations for what I will do for them. And I don't want to. I don't want to have those obligations. And you shouldn't enter into something where you get people expecting you to do something unless you're willing to do it. And often the reason people get into difficulty with that is because it happens very slowly, right? So suppose the sort of little old lady next door, you offer to mow her lawn, right? And so she says yes, and you do it, and you feel good about that. And then she fires the man who used to do her lawn, and now she's reliant on you. And if it happened over months and years, she'd be entitled to be reliant on you, right? You've invited her to make those assumptions. You could say to her, yes, I will do this once, but you have to understand that I'm not committing myself to anything. But that would be an unneighborly way of doing it, right? And so what you do is you think, oh, I'm not going to do this forever, but you just start doing it, and then after 6 months, there you are, trapped. Because now she's got legitimate expectations. And at the very least, you're going to have to wind them down somehow. So I think,
or move,
or move, yes. But no, that's the morally wrong answer. I had an experience on the train yesterday, which made me think a bit about courage. So I was on the inexpensive train, the Northeast Corridor train, not the Acela. But I was in the business section carriage. Which is cheaper than the regular Acela seat. And I'm paying for all this, so it's just I decided to do that. And a woman across, and two of my sisters called me at the same time on WhatsApp, one from England, one from Namibia. So I was having this interesting conversation with them about selling my parents' house in Ghana. And this woman came up to me and said, shh. And I sort of thought, oh, that's very weird. And I realized that she thought we were in the quiet car. And so she was chastising me for doing something that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't do that in the quiet car. In the quiet car, I'd get up and go, but I'm allowed in the business car to make my phone calls. And so she was brave enough to do that. But a little bit later, she was having a conversation with her husband, which I overheard.
Did you shush her?
But I didn't tell her to shut up. And I realized that she had now grasped that she wasn't in the quiet car. And I thought to myself, she's brave enough to chastise me, but not brave enough to apologize. And I sat there waiting to see if she was going to say on the way out, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it wasn't the quiet, but she didn't. She just did. Anyway, sorry, I didn't know why.
We could do this all night.
Anyway, so if you do wrongly chastise someone, I feel you should have the courage to, just a piece of advice. I think you should have the courage.
Advice, as I said, we covered a lot tonight. So
Yes.
Your parting words to our wonderful audience here in the auditorium and the folks watching online. Any advice you want to give them facing as we go out and face these issues?
Gosh, no. I mean,
we want to thank Dr. Kwame Anthony Appiah here tonight. He's our Kluge Prize winner, and I want to thank all our folks from the Library of Congress John Kluge Center, who hosted tonight. I hope you all had fun. So if you still want to do something, our summer films on the lawn, it will be starting once the sun goes down in 30 minutes. So if you want to see how the Spy Kids deal with their social dilemmas, you're welcome to bring your favorite beverage and watch outside. Thank you again for coming. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. You did a great job.